Yesterday, we saw pretty much a reversal of Monday's move. Monday was a strong day, punctuated by the Moderna vaccine news, which vaccine news is good news for the market. Let's be clear. But having come on the back of the Pfizer news, I think the reaction to the Moderna story was a bit more muted, as it should have been. We already had the vaccine news percolate into the market. I do think a large percentage of Monday's move was pre-expiration week buying. There's an adage, by expiration week on Monday. It's statistically not necessarily the right move, but it's not necessarily a slam dunk. But people tend to do that, and which is why even before the Moderna news, remember on Monday we were up 20 some odd points in the SPOOs. We pretty much doubled that by the end of the day. Much of that was, in sort of a closing market frenzy within the last 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so, which meant there was a big basket on the close. But since then, we've just been meandering and moved lower sharply later in the day yesterday because we had the inverse of vaccine news. Unfortunately, it should come as no surprise that the COVID story is not getting better right now. It's getting worse. And probably will be until the vaccine really takes hold, or unless governments start locking down more, which they've been relatively loath to do. I think the precipitating factor yesterday was New York City closing its schools. In and of itself, that's not necessarily a market-moving piece of news. When you combine it with when you think about what it says in the larger term, which is that here's the biggest school district in the country closing its doors to in-person learning, that doesn't send a good message to markets in terms of the COVID recovery. This morning, the economic numbers we saw, housing continues to be good, employment tends to be tricky. And listening to some comments from Fed governors, they're basically hat in hand saying we need fiscal stimulus. We're here to do what we can do, but we need some help on the fiscal side. And it's still not clear where that's coming from in light of the continued election uncertainty. More or less the Mark, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said, well, it's up to Congress to do it now. So they've more or less, the White House has more or less abdicated from the role. The Senate has a couple of days before they go on break. Then after they return, there's a spending bill that needs to be negotiated. I'm not saying that, I'm not looking for a government shutdown. I don't think that markets will be that suicidal. Congress would be that suicidal, but they're going to be consumed with that. They tried to get Judy Shelton confirmed to the Fed Board of Governors. That failed because we're missing senators due to COVID. So everything is up in the air. If you can get a meaningful stimulus bill, the market will love that. Let's be clear. But I think as the market sort of comes to terms with the fact that we've got this vaccine news, it's down the road, however, and we have in the meantime a worsening COVID situation and governments that are, I think the market had kind of decided that governments were not going to do too much about it, but we're starting to see cutbacks in a meaningful way. And then when you get into year end, there's a bit more uncertainty on top of this because a lot of the student loan and rent moratoriums fade out at year end. And I think that has provided a lift both to the economy and the markets. I do think a lot of the new money that we saw coming into the stock market was from people not having to pay back their student loans for a few months. That was on the average student loan payment is around $400 a month. You think of all that money that is now for the most part by young investors, and that money. I do think a lot of it came into the market, and I think that's provided a lift. And take that away if that requires some dissaving. And remember, although you have a change in administration coming in January, you have the current administration in December. They already extended the moratorium once. It's not clear to me that they're going to do that as they did at the end of September. So you could run into a really tricky time into late December, early January, as more and more people scramble for money. It's also probably going to affect the Christmas season as people realize that if they've been able to postpone student loan payments. I'm not even getting into the rent payments idea because, while I do think there's going to be some people who are always optimistic, I think if you're skipping your rent, it's not so much to be able to put the money in the stock market. It's more to put food on your table. And so that's a different equation and in many ways much worse for the broader economy. But thinking in terms of markets, these are the things I'm keeping in mind. And of course, I'm still trying to wrestle with, and I've alluded to it in the columns, why VIX remains sort of stubbornly high. Its level now is, implying more or less 1.5% moves for the next 30 days, which I guess, considering what we've seen, it's not that outlandish because remember it's on average 1.5%. So you have bigger days and smaller days. But then I see the VIX curve, call it between 25 and 26 out through July, which would imply more or less 1.5% daily moves ad infinitum, at least for the next 6 months. Those are historically very high levels. And so I have to wonder what the market's wrestling with. It's not clear what they are. There's definitely more buyers of VIX puts than VIX calls, as evidenced by the VIX put-call ratio. It's got its own put-call ratio, but the broader put-call ratio is very heavily toward calls. The put-call ratio, because puts divided by calls, is at very low levels. The kind pretty much seen only at market spikes and peaks. So we've got a lot of stuff to wrestle with. Oh, and by the way, I didn't even mention it. How could I forget this? It's expiration tomorrow. So the first thing you should be doing, which I can't believe I saved till last, the first thing you should be doing is going through the strikes in names where you have option positions, looking for the open interest and realizing that those are going to be the levels that act as attractors on a monthly expiration. We've gone through it before. Don't ever forget about that on expiration, just like I did. We'll talk to you tomorrow, either by writing or by a video. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.